Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders in crypto and blockchain all around the world. And today I have an amazing guest. He is the CEO of Breeder DAO. His name is Renz Chong. Renz, welcome.
Hey everyone, hey Jamil, happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, really excited to get on and get started.
Awesome. It's an honor. It's an honor. And so let's kick off. Um, the first question is, what is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
Sure. So I guess first off, I really started off as a consultant for Mitchell Madison. If you guys don't know that, it's a spin-off of McKinsey, where the original founder is actually from McKinsey. Um, And I guess if you look at my background, even from college, the course that I took is what we would call the Jack of all trades, master of none. It's a course called management engineering, with no specialized or no expertise on any particular field. And so, for most of us, consulting was the natural track, right? Um, and I guess a lot of you already know that consulting is basically going into different industries and different countries to see and to deep dive into all of these things and eventually provide recommendations and strategies, right? So for me specifically, the cases or the clients that I've handled were mostly about data analytics, strategy and growth, and machine learning to a certain extent. So when I was doing my time in consulting, what I realized is that there's a lack of execution. And so after some time, I got tired of just doing the back end work and decided to move to a more execution based environment which led me eventually to startups. So one of the most prominent startups that I work with is called Angkas, which is basically like Uber or Grab, but instead of like focusing on four-wheeled vehicles, it focused on two-wheeled motorcycle vehicles. And at one point, it became like the primary mode of transportation from where I come from, which is the Philippines, because of the traffic situation and the road situation back there. So I was handling like driver management. So being able to understand how the operations or the flow of like traffic works and being able to identify hotspots within the city to improve efficiency of bikers overall and to be able to accommodate more rides in the process. So yeah, eventually that's how my journey for startup started. And then eventually I hopped from one startup to another, trying to find, what's out there for me. Eventually landing into the entire crypto rabbit hole, which kind of like gave me that new spark because startups are all great and startups are great and all, right? But if you actually look at the most successful startups, they don't really operate as startups where you have to wear multiple hats and every day there's a new challenge, there's a new issue. um the startup that I initially worked for became too big that it became more of like a corporation than a startup. And so crypto really sparked my interest because the entire space is actually like a startup. Like it's very nascent and people don't know what they're doing, where we can take the space, and then what sort of innovation we can push forward, right? So the developments are all very interesting and very unique. And what's actually very in right now may not be the same for tomorrow. So it really was like very attractive and very appealing to me as a person who's very curious and who always wants to be in on the next big thing. So I guess just to give some background on how I started, I know it's a long background, apologies for that, but yeah, just to give some background on how I first journeyed into crypto. So I was trading back in 2017, not a good trader at that because like by 2018 I lost 99% of my portfolio. I decided to kind of take a break and stop. But it was different when I heard about Axie Infinity. So I really love gaming. It's been my passion since I was young. And I remember my mom calling me out for, just playing and not really studying. But back then I was like dreaming about becoming like a professional esports player of that. Um, but because I have to balance it with studies and growing up as a Chinese, or growing up in a Chinese family where business takes priority and making money takes priority, kind of didn't go into that. So yeah, basically, I was more of like gaming on the side. Um, so yeah, I would play like a lot of games, try and buy like all of these items within these games, only to eventually realize that I'm not really gonna end up like playing this game for forever, right? At one point, it was only natural for me to get bored of the game and then move on from that. But because of the type of gamer I am, where I want to collect like everything and I want to have every single character, gacha games really got me good, and I spent a lot of fortune there. But yeah, so when I heard about Axie Infinity and the idea of being able to own your assets, I was like, this is something that I really want to get into. And so I started playing. Started off really as a scholar on for a friend, just really trying to understand what a market is, or what's so appealing about this game, right? And then eventually realize that people are all like flocking into this as though like it's the next big thing, and everyone would want assets, right? You can see the existence of like a lot of guilds left and right, because I'm situated in the Philippines. I can see, I enter a restaurant, there's a lot of people playing, right? Or even talking about it. So eventually that eventually hit me, right? If everyone's gonna need an asset, then there needs to be someone who would be providing these assets. And that's basically how our journey started. While everyone is focused on creating and playing, right? Or getting users to play it and playing it, we were kind of like on the other side, or on the other end, where we need to provide assets to be able to support all of these guys. And that's how Peter DAO came to life.
Excellent. Yeah, I understand the Philippine motorcycle economy. I spent a few weeks of my life in Hanoi, and it's
Cool.
kind of similar. Yeah, I loved it there,
It's way
by the
worse in
way.
Hanoi though. I think it's a little bit better in the Philippines.
Okay. Yeah, I still people say awesome or cool or groovy or whatever they say. I say motorbike. When I get really excited. Um,
Mhm.
so cool. So Breeder DAO, right? Um, what is it all about, and what gives you your unique edge in the market?
Right. So we started really off with um, breeding of Axie, hence the name. And the way we went about it was kind of understood like how how we can maximize like the earnings of the individuals, because back then the campaign was entirely about like play to earn, right? And so we had data analytics set up trying to see like which axis has the highest win rates, and what sort of like balance in terms of like value to cost basis would make sense for an ordinary scholar, right? So we kind of created like our own builds, which we believe would at least yield this amount of like SLP, which would provide like the highest ROI for both the scholar and the manager. Um, so that's how we actually started. We also launched our own tool, which is called Playcore, which allows users to be able to track all of these other games and other um, assets, so that they may be able to see for themselves like which ones they should be buying. But I guess going back to Breeder DAO, at least that's how we started, right, with the entire like play to earn. Now, how are we, I guess, relevant nowadays, especially since the play to earn campaign is slowly coming to an end, or at least has already finished, right? Um, we think of it this way, like when it first started and people were actually looking at how blockchain can be applied to gaming, they started with decentralized assets within playable characters, right? So think of it as like Axie releasing 10,000 Axies and then allowing the users themselves to generate the remaining, or the next few million Axies. Um, so that was a decentralization on the playable asset side. And what we're seeing right now is that the game is not actually just limited to its playable characters. The game is actually a sum of different components. You have the playable characters, you have skins, which is actually a very huge market, you have lore, you have content, you have environment. And a lot of people have already started looking into decentralizing lore. A lot of people have already started looking into decentralizing content. You have the likes of, I guess, Treasure DAO allowing users to build on top of their ecosystem. You have the likes of NFT worlds allowing for decentralized environment creation. So eventually these worlds will become their own environments, and people can choose to, modify or create their own feel, or their own environments based off their different communities, right? And the way we actually look at our relevance in the space is that we actually specialize in assets, right? And what's the closest next thing to a playable asset that people would want to? And that would be like, wearables or skins, right? And that's where, our new product actually become really relevant, because we're using both AI and the power of blockchain to be able to allow you to create skins that are now not just dictated by developers but by yourself, in a way dabbling on, what it means for an asset to also be interoperable and to be used across different metaverses, now that it's actually generated using a third party platform instead of produced within the game itself. So yeah, that's what we're looking into it. But in summary, like Breeder DAO is essentially like what we would call a factory is the metaverse. Essentially, we want to focus on like asset creation, not just ourselves, but allowing users to use our products in order to generate their own assets, be it a playable character, or like an ass or like a skin, or like a wearable in game, or future developments also include like static objects within games and the likes.
Okay. Um, I'm not up to date on every single thing in gaming, but you said play to earn is coming to an end, and you're also focusing on empowering your community to make informed decisions and maximize their income and experience, right? So, are you saying that you're shifting now from play to earn to play to collect or play to invest, or how's the market now shaping, and how are you hanging on or keeping or building your community and empowering them through the shift?
Right. So I guess just to provide more context on the entire play to earn idea, play to earn for me was more of like a movement or a campaign to bring in people from Web 2, or from non Web 3 natives to Web 3, right? The original appeal of blockchain was, you know, with blockchain games, you get to earn, right? But ultimately, it was only a consequence of people being able to buy and sell assets, as one of the ultimately as one of the main drivers or one of the main applications of gaming, right? Which is being able to own your assets. So because you're able to own your assets, then you're able to buy and sell them. And because you're able to buy and sell them, then you can earn, right? So at least that's how we were thinking about it. And if you really look at gaming right now, there's also even a lot of people who are playing to earn, right? And it's a concept that didn't necessarily or wasn't necessarily derived from the idea of like Web3. It just became like a strong come on, right? For Web3 users. You have games like Genshin Impact where people would just make unlimited accounts trying to re-roll the initial drops and then selling the account afterwards, right? What blockchain did was, instead of having to create like these individual accounts, you can sell the characters themselves. So it's a concept that isn't entirely new, but because of blockchain, you're now able to, I guess, decompose, or like take out the components of an individual game and then sell them, or like transact with them on an individual capacity, right? So when I say play to earn is dead, I'm saying that the campaign is dead, but there are still, and their motivation is to actually earn from these games. And this is actually a profile or a group of players that were actually Infinity even started. So yeah, at least that movement has come to an end. People are now exploring the idea of like play and earn, play to own, play and own, right? Exactly why a lot of the a lot of the games right now are more or less focusing on the idea of playability or entertainment within their games, and less on like, you can play here because you can you should play this because you can earn, right? It's now more of like, you should play this because it's a fun game. And from the developer side, right, what we're thinking right now is that, you know, there's not going to be a distinction between Web 2 or Web 3 in the future. People are not going to say that Web 3 games are going to be ugly or uglier than Web 2 games. The same way as like when we first had the distinction between pay to win and free to play, or pay to play rather, and free to play, right? The first iterations of free to play were actually below like current Web3 standards, right? And people were all thinking that, free to play is never going to be a concept because the games that are is not actually going to be great, right? But that's only because like the monetization models for free to play were very were very new and very weak from the get-go. And when they actually discovered that they can make money off of ads, and instead of like charging the users on a um, per cartridge basis, right? They can choose to monetize them continuously via ads. That's when they were able to come up with like strong games, develop quality that are now similar to pay to play games, right? And so we're kind of like seeing the same thing all over again, where blockchain essentially is a tool, right? It's not entirely a separate category, and it's more of like we haven't really lock generate out of like this new thing, or like if there's even merits to creating like a decentralized game to allow or to be able to monetize something there such that development will continue, and then we can create like compared to free to play and pay to play, right? So yeah, I guess like we're at that point where we're still constantly exploring, but at least on the developer side, they're already looking at creating games that are the same quality to free to play and pay to play, right?
That makes sense with what you said earlier. That is still that blockchain is still an area that everybody's learning. So that makes perfect sense to me. Um, so I want to ask you about this. I want to shift gears a little bit more macro. I read a report on Thursday, App Radar. They're pretty good with analytics for gaming. They recently published a report showing Asia as a booming crypto gaming industry, with the U.S. as a laggard, right? So, what drives Asia's high interest in crypto gaming, and how is this growth sustainable? And then what you guys are doing in Asia?
Right. I guess this ultimately ties back to the idea of like play to earn, right, as a concept. Um, Compared to like US or compared to, I guess, first world countries, right? Third world countries in terms of like minimum wages are actually very, very low, right? At one point, like games like Axie Infinity provided more income um, to regular, I guess Filipinos, since I'm gonna use like Philippines as like a basis, the regular Filipinos, than going to a normal job, right, or a typical job here. So I guess that created like a movement, which then cascaded to a lot of individuals here, and eventually allowed for more people to enter into the space. So think about it, like because I get to earn more, like in this game, then I just would rather quit my job and then play this game. I didn't get stressed. Like I didn't have to spend 8 hours, but I got more with this game than my job would ever give me, right? You have success stories where people would actually buy cars, buy houses just by playing Axie Infinity. And so that entire thing created like a new huge wave of adoption, at least on Asia side and specifically in the Philippines, right? So I think if you look at it, the campaign was the one that actually helped the adoption for Asia and for countries like the Philippines. And if you look at like the US market, um, they really don't care about like being able to earn what $8 a day. Um, it's something not big for them, right? Or it's not big for them in general. And I guess like if you look at the West in general and more of like the developing country or developed countries, right? Um, it's basically their hourly wage, right? But for countries like the Philippines, it's actually very huge, and so that created like a movement. But I guess adopt like blockchain gaming. Um, I think this goes really well with how the developers are looking at it. US is actually a very lucrative market for a lot of like these games, right? And if you actually look at the population or the percentage of people that are actually spending on free to play games, a huge number or a huge portion is actually based out of the US. And so the way people are now thinking about it is that if we're eventually going to introduce like skins, wearables, or a lot of these things within games, then US is going to be like a solid market. But before that, like we need to create like games that are going to be appealing to them, right? And not like, incentivize them or motivate them via the earning component, which is what we use to actually garner like eyeballs on Asia, and specifically for developing countries, right? So it's going to be a different game altogether. And for me, like, because the quality of games isn't of the standards of what typically the US and more developed countries are actually playing, right? Time for sure. And it will take um a new set or a new genre of like games aside from the initial one, which is more PvP card battler, right? So yeah.
Got it. Thank you. So back to that report a little bit because I want to tie this in because you are now. Um, one of the reasons, one of the big reasons, one of the big reasons for growth is airdrops, right?
Mhm,
So I've just seen them happen, and then a lot of
mhm.
people get rugged. That's right. Isn't it the Wild West? And how are you effectively governing airdrops?
Right. Um, So we're actually a live token already. So the way a lot of people start off growing their community is, as you said, via airdrops, right? And it's also a thing not just with tokens, but also with NFTs, which is why the concept of like free NFT kind of started, right? As well, because people believe that in order to um, really create like a strong community and a strong following, then giving assets for free from the get-go is actually a good way to incentivize them. Because if that asset give them money, right? At least with the current Web3 crowd as well, then they would be more loyal, and then they would actually buy into the entire story or the entire narrative of your project, right? They become in a way more invested because they got something out of it. And the way we're thinking about it is that you know, airdrops are ultimately a reward system, right? And for us, because we're already a live project and we want to be able to reward our users, the way we go about it is that if you're actually participating within the ecosystem, then we give you rewards. If you're actually, staking and participating in the governance side of things, then we give you rewards, right? But in order to do so, we need to be able to identify that you are doing so. And that's why we're tracking, governance, we're tracking, staking, we're tracking use of your wallet within our products and our ecosystem. But for me, the broader the broader incentive here would not really be on the side of like the airdrops, but how actually do you reward your users. And I'd say that DAOs in general haven't really figured out how to properly reward their users or to properly incentivize people to come into their projects, right? And we don't really know if the pool of reward system that we're actually doing will become, because Web3 hasn't really reached like mass market, right? And the way we're thinking about DAOs is that it's only comprised of individuals who are already in Web3, and we don't really know if the current incentive mechanisms that we're creating are going to be the same as how it would be once like mass adoption comes, and once this market or like the more non Web3 native market comes in and joins us, right? But by then, like, I don't think there's going to be a distinction between a non Web3 native, because Web3 is going to be for everyone already, right? So yeah, in a way, like the way we're thinking about it is that now we're actually creating a reward system that's applicable to our current market, but in the future it will surely change, and the way we're going to address like this entire reward system may not be via airdrops, right? It could be as simple as just making them feel like they're just part of like a community, right? And creating products that addresses actual issues that they have in terms of like onboarding, and not really so much as like providing them airdrops or free money. At least that's how we're thinking about that.
That makes sense. I'll still need to learn how to compensate the people. I agree. I had
Yep.
somebody's. who had a Dallas league, he recently said to me, "Oh, we have this new partnership. You could do all the work." I'm like, what's missing here? A compensation. So yeah, that would have been.
Right. Right.
So I agree. So one of the things that I haven't really focused on when I interviewed gaming companies before is this concept of guilds, and I realized that I don't really understand them.
Mhm.
So I want to ask you, what are guilds, and then why are guilds the next vehicles to onboard the next billion users of the metaverse?
Right. I guess I'll start off with the idea of like guilds and how they first came to life, right? Um, so guilds, I guess, pioneered by Yield Guild Games, right, really started off as a means to be able to onboard more users because the price of these assets, specifically Axie, were insane, right? And as I told you, the people that were attracted by this game come from, I guess, countries where your minimum wage is around $300, right? If the price of the asset is $800, then even if you actually spend your entire month of wage, you won't be able to afford one, and you need three, right? So the idea of games, and I guess like I'm exaggerating here because that was only like a one point, right, where Axis reached $800, wasn't really like a prolonged period of time, but like you get the idea of like or like Axis were actually very expensive during that time, and people that would want to be incentivized to play it um, wouldn't be really able to afford it. So the guild system was created to support these individual users called scholars, right? And bridge them back to capital or funding, which is assets, right? So you have people who have the money but do not have the time to play it. And you have people who have a lot of time but do not have the money. You bridge them via a guild system. And that's ultimately how we kind of like started this. And from there, like everyone's basically creating their own guild, right? Um, but I guess like the more successful guilds understood that this kind of concept isn't the only value add that they're going to provide to their community, right? It's not solely about like being unable to afford these assets, because at the end of the day, like if you want to reach like mass adoption, right, these assets will eventually or we developers would constantly make an effort to reduce the price of these assets to allow for more users to be able to participate. And for me, guilds act as like as an um, onboarding organization, um, specifically for education and for community building. Um, a lot of people, even though they've actually ventured into Axie Infinity, or even if they've actually played blockchain games, still do not have that understanding of how Web3 or what blockchain really is, right? And for us to be able to, really drive innovation and development, people who are actually in the space must really understand what it is that they're actually using. We don't expect like everyone to, have to understand how blockchain is or what blockchain can be used for, because it's the same with internet, right? It's not as though like people know like what the back end looks like for the internet. People just all know that the internet is a tool for us to be able to connect, to be able to search things that we don't understand and all of that. But because that's the situation that we were born into. But the earlier adopters of like internet had to study and had to really know what it's all about to be able to innovate and create these products, right? And so I see guilds as um I guess the early adopters of like this new internet, who are now onboarding more people and making them understand how we're dealing things, so that eventually we create products that people would actually use, and people wouldn't need to understand like how does the back end for that one works, right? But in order to do so, someone must actually do that. And eventually, like the way people are thinking about uh, guilds in the context of like games would be more on the side of people that actually understands, or people that actually shares the same um, objective, the same goals, the same interests for a particular genre, for a particular type of game, for a particular idea, right? And guilds are basically communities, right? And we have like communities that are built off like out of everywhere. Again, based off like an idea, based off like a want for a specific particular genre, and yeah, hyper specialization of these guilds would actually be a thing in the future. It's the same way as like DAOs, right? You can look at these guilds as like individual DAOs fighting for, or like believing in a specific aspect of life or of a specific, you know, blockchain ideology. But yeah, like these are ultimately organizations. And I guess the way we understood guilds from the get-go was limited to gaming and limited towards like providing that funding to scholars, right? But a guild is more than just that. And you can see the guilds that have survived have slowly shifted and have slowly specialized and focused on individual things.
Yeah, I'm looking at it from a onboarding perspective. ICOs, I was there during the ICO days, and that had its
Mhm.
flaws. And then the CFI implosion, that also had its flaws. What do you think we need to watch out for as far as guild? Like, what works well, but then what are the things that we need to be, on the lookout for of guild possibly not being that vehicle?
Right. I guess it's really purpose. Like the problem with the initial set of guilds that copied the same model as YGG is that they thought of guild as like a business, right? Where I should be able to, ROI in less than 6 months or in less than 2 months if I provide this specific action, right? And so when that kind of like idea failed, right? Because that was the primary purpose of their guild, then the guild did not survive, right? The community that they built eventually was dissolved, right? And for me, it really like understanding what the purpose is of your guild, right? If you're gonna be an education platform for these users specific to DeFi, right? And the way you're gonna go about it is that everyone would actually share, or people will actually talk about like the latest hits on like DeFi, right? Um, so for me, identifying like a purpose for your guild is most crucial, right? You cannot just be a guild and just think about like business, because then you're actually taking away the power of a guild, which is more centered on the community, right? Having that shared vision, having that shared interest. And eventually, if your business model fails, then your guild will eventually fail. And I think that's what happened to 95% of the guilds, where because the Axie Infinity model is not as profitable as how it was before, then they eventually decided to dissolve their guilds. And I guess moving forward, the way that we're gonna look at guilds, at least on the onboarding process side, is that these are ultimately organizations, right? They have specific um, deals, they have their specific goals, they have their specific interests, and alignment of interest is one that's really helpful. If you're in contact with a lot of these guilds, you must be able to look at them as like profiles of communities, right? If I'm like a DAO that's centered on DeFi, or like which has a focus on DeFi, and I contact like a guild who's specializing in games, it might not make sense, right? So for me, like thinking about guilds is also thinking about like profiles of individuals who you want to target, and understanding that target market, and market in general is going to be crucial in developing or in the development of that onboarding perspective.
Makes a lot of sense. I never thought of it that way. Look at each group, like each community as an individual profile. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that. That's smart. That sounds like a really good idea. Okay. So interesting. Thank you. Um, So I want to thank you very much for your time today. This has been actually it's been really enlightening for me, and I enjoyed talking to you. And I want to thank you very much. And I have one last question, and it's a layup. Is how can people find out more information? What you're up to? How can they follow you? How can they do any of that?
All right, so we're very much active in almost all social media sites. But if you want to know more about us, please go to our website. We actually worked on it a lot. You'll find it at breederdao.io. If you want to follow us, like we're most active on Twitter, but you can also shoot us like a DM on LinkedIn. So for Twitter, that's gonna be breederdao at breederdao, and my personal would be Renz underscore BDAO. For LinkedIn, it's as simple as just my name, which is Renz Chong. So yeah, I guess thank you so much as well, Jamil. This has been really fun, and I got to you know, I guess assess in a way like or maybe look back as well to how we really started and then where we're at right now, not just in the context of like Breeder DAO, but as an industry, right? And it's quite exciting because like the last year me wouldn't even thought about like all of these things and wouldn't really see myself where I am right now. And it's just so nice to actually look back and get a sense of accomplishment, right? That we've actually come far from where we were before. And yeah, just really that nostalgia is just giving me like a really nice feeling right now. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for your time today.